Welcome to the Tarot Coven Cast. Real people, real talk, real magic. Hello there, lovely listeners, and welcome to the Tarot Coven Cast. I'm one of your hosts, Jasmine.
And I'm Jekanovia.
And this time on the show, we're sharing our thoughts on The Power of Tarot by Liz Worth. It's sort of like a book club, but we're only meeting once. But first, we've got some patron shout outs to do. So we would like to say a big thank you to Melissa S. and Hannah W. Thank you, ladies, so much for joining us over on the Patreon.
We love you.
And if you're wondering why your name wasn't mentioned, we just haven't, we either haven't reached out to you to see if you want to do like a more personal shout out or a different kind of shout out, or you signed up before we recorded this, or after we recorded this, I should say. All right. So let's dive into this book. I kind of peeked at our notes before we started recording. We've got like 10 pages of notes, so there's lots to discuss tonight.
Yes.
So let's just dive into it. I figured we could do some overall thoughts before we dive into each sort of part of the book. And, you know, up front when I was like, it's kind of like a book club, but we're only meeting once. It's kind of a joke. It's kind of not. We probably should have done this a couple of chapters at a time.
Yeah.
Doing a whole book all at once kind of feels silly now in retrospect that I think about it. But, you know, whatever, you live, you learn, you podcast, you go to sleep, you do it all again the next day. But so if we ever do another book, which I mean, I still enjoyed reading it, so maybe we will.
Yeah, I'd like to do this again.
Yeah, but maybe next time we'll actually do it like as a book club throughout one half of the season or something. But yeah, so this is going to be a little bit of an experiment. So bear with us, and we hope you enjoy this little journey. I mean, do you want to kick us off with some overall thoughts?
Sure. I mean, the very first thing, I just want to put a disclaimer out there because I realized as I was writing these notes that some of them seem like I'm like not impressed or almost monotone about everything I read. And I just want to make sure that everyone understands I have so much respect for Liz Worth and the obvious blood, sweat, and tears that went into the creation of this book. If that energy happens to come across as we chat, I just want to admit that I kind of struggled in parts to really dig in with my whole heart. For a few reasons, but none of them really have anything to do with the book or the author. The first reason is because I made the mistake of buying it in ebook format, and that was my bad. I'm the kind of person who needs a real book in my hands.
Right.
So, I mean, lesson learned. I'm also a very right brain person, so that's like that creative. Like I need the stimulation and stuff. And this book is laid out in a really practical, like left brain way, which is going to be paradise for anybody who has that logical kind of mindset.
Mm-hmm.
And third, I've never actually been able to connect with a tarot book before, so I hope that also doesn't translate into me not liking this book, because I really did. I really enjoyed it, and it gave me a lot of things to think about. I just wanted to kind of say, because I'm an intuitive reader, and I had never read a book about tarot other than like the little guidebooks sometimes. So I really had no idea what any of the so-called proper meanings behind any of the cards were until a few years ago when I downloaded Waite's companion book, the one that he wrote like back in 1909.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't even remember anything from that. So I mean, that's just how things are, in one ear, out the other. And I think that was probably the very first tarot book I ever read, which I know sounds almost ludicrous because I've been reading tarot cards for so long. But anyway, so most of my tarot education has been through conversations and listening to podcasts, watching YouTube videos, and watching other readers, and kind of working with the cards myself. So I just wanted to get those little disclaimers out there.
Yeah.
Did you want to chat about kind of your overall thoughts? There was a couple of things that surprised me about it, but if you want to go over your thoughts first.
Yeah, sure. I have some mixed feelings about the book overall, and I think it's just because of where I'm at in my tarot journey and what this book is sort of meant for, I think, if that makes sense. So, like at certain points, it did feel like a review of ideas and concepts that I'm already pretty familiar with, but then at others, I was given this like totally new way to look at tarot concepts. And I was given this infusion of love for the practice in these certain little tidbits, these certain little parts of the book. Then again, at parts, I felt like it was a little too workbooky for my taste, if that makes sense. Like the prompts are great. I think they're going to be really helpful for people that are looking for that kind of thing, but I don't know that that's what I wanted when I sat down to read it every night. And then yet again, some of them were really powerful. And I was like, okay, I can't wait to do this because it's something that I never thought of. So I think overall, this is a great book for mostly beginners. I think it's a great way to dive into tarot, particularly because a lot of the viewpoints that Liz has, I think sort of if you get those first, they're going to save you from like a lot of nonsense that's out there, and we can get into that as we get to certain points throughout the book. Um
Mhm.
but I also do think that it has some merit for seasoned readers because I can tell you that, like I just said, there were certain parts of the book that did really reignite my love for certain aspects of tarot. You know, I was talking about it on a previous episode. Just the way that Liz talks about the elements was so insightful and so unique to me that it was just like, oh man, I can't. I've been looking at cards for the past week only with element, and it's been so valuable and so powerful. So, you know, like it's kind of a weird place that I'm feeling. Like I loved it, but I also was like, nah, okay. So those are my thoughts.
I get it.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, I totally see where you're coming from because yeah, there was a lot of it that was just the bare basics that I obviously already knew, but it was also nice to review, like you said, it was a nice kind of refresher, but then there
Yeah.
was some things I was like, "Right," and, I never thought of that, so, yeah, I get it, I get where you're at.
Yeah, and I think, it's not I mean, by no means do I think it's a bad book, and it's certainly
No.
very well written. And I think sometimes maybe it's good for more seasoned readers to go back and read something like this to sort of humble yourself in a way, because even though I did feel like it was a review at some parts, it was also like, oh, right, this is what people who are first coming to tarot are thinking about.
Yeah.
And I think it's good to reframe every so often and remember what that beginning of the practice is like, so that you can still connect with people in that way, if that makes sense.
Yeah. Yeah, it totally does, and I mean, we're probably gonna well, I know we're gonna talk about it later on, but, like, there was a few times and I was like, "I'm so glad that she busted that. I'm so glad that she brought that
Yes.
up or mentioned," so, I mean, even though it was things I knew, it was really nice to see someone present it,
Hmm.
so
So what were the things that surprised you?
well, okay, so the first thing was that there's actually no tarot card, like, specific interpretations,
Hmm.
and I was kind of expecting a whole section on, like, this is what the ace means, and this is what the 2 mean so I
Right.
was surprised about that. Pleasantly surprised, really, because I don't respond well to being told what to see,
Right.
maybe suggested, but not told what to see.
Yes.
And then the second thing that really surprised me is there's really not much about, like, the spiritual aspect of the tarot, of working with the tarot.
Hmm.
It's just very, like I said, logical and very methodical, which it was interesting to me. Like, it's not that I didn't like that there wasn't anything in there, but I kind of expected it to be, and I was surprised that there wasn't. So it was really interesting to just see it kind of, I don't want to say textbook because that's definitely not the right word, but just more of a practical, this is just what it is. Look at it.
Yeah, it's like this book has no frills, and that's fine. I
Yeah.
mean,
Yeah.
because there are so many books out there that have all the frills and do all of the things and are only about the spiritual side of things. And I mean,
Mhm.
I think that this is a unique book in that way for sure. All right, so let's dive into the introduction then. There are sort of three parts to this book plus the introduction. I just have a few brief thoughts. I mean, essentially, I never read an introduction to a book. Do you?
Yeah,
Yeah, I figured
nerd.
you would. I
Nerd.
figured you
I
would.
wanted to say, no, I never do, but I do every time.
I'm just like, and you know what's funny is that once I was in the process of writing a book, and I was writing an introduction and I was like, nope, just going to call it chapter 1 because I'm not going to do the thing that I hate in books. Like, I just don't like an introduction. I'm just like, just make it part of your book.
Actually, honestly, I'll read the introduction, and if it doesn't vibe with me, just won't read the book. And that is so terrible.
Oh,
I feel like
cutthroat.
such
I
a
like
bad human.
it.
But I mean, it gives you a really good taste,
It
right?
does. And I gotta say, I read the introduction for this one because we were doing it for the podcast. And I'm honestly very glad that I did read it because, kind of what you're just saying, it gave me a total taste for what the book was going to be like and a lot of Liz's sort of points of view. She talks about like, people get so hung up on whether or not you should read reversals and how do
Yeah.
you shuffle. And she's like, those can be important, but they're really just surface issues. And I was like, oh, yes, okay, I agree so much. And just other things that she said, like, how you want your tarot practice to grow with you, and that as you read this book, take what works and leave the rest. It's not gospel. I don't know everything. And I just thought that was such a good reminder. And
Yeah.
I don't know that we've ever said it on the show, but the same goes for us, guys. Like, we
Yeah.
don't know everything. For us, it's always take what works and leave the rest. Always,
Yeah.
always, always.
And please share your views. We love to
Yes.
hear more. Like, this is definitely a two-way conversation.
Yeah, absolutely.
Three-way, I suppose, because never mind, you
And
get it.
sometimes 4-way.
Yeah. Depends on what we feel like. Yeah, no, I do. I think that probably that statement when Liz was like, "Hey, I don't know everything. This is just the way I do it." That's kind of where the respect was built for me because she wasn't coming at it as, "Hey, I'm the expert here. I'm going to
Mhm.
talk to you about it." It was almost like, "Hey, this is just what I do.
Yeah.
Hopefully it helped."
Yeah.
And I
And
really resonated with that.
even the way of her explaining, like, this is how I'm going to approach this because this is what's worked for me and this is the best way that I can explain things,
Yeah.
and I'm not going to try and be anything that I'm not.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah. And yeah, that was to me was just like, "Okay, I like you."
yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. And then like what kind of sprung from this for me was like being open to always learning new things is so important. And it's not just in your tarot practice or your spiritual practice. It's like in everything.
Yeah.
And I think even Liz said it somewhere in the book, and I couldn't quite find the exact quote, but I totally agree with her. It was basically that anyone who claims that they know everything there is to know is, like, I would say, full of shit. I don't remember her words.
Yeah. Yeah.
But yeah.
Yeah, being open to things in all parts of your life, so important. It's reminding me of a tweet that I saw just a couple of days ago. Of course, I saw the tweet on Instagram because, like, I rarely go on Twitter. But it was saying something like, I'm not really worried about wrinkles or gray hair. What I'm worried about is being, like, open-minded enough that I'm not putting down younger generations for,
Yeah.
being open to certain things or whatever. Like, I'm definitely paraphrasing, but I was like, damn, that's so true. Yeah, I
Yeah.
hope, because I've dealt with so many older people that are, like, so close-minded. It's going a little off topic, but you see what I mean.
Yeah.
All right, so shall we dive into part 1, to know tarot?
Let's do it.
All right. So I kind of, as I read through this, it kind of felt to me that this part of the book was mostly about getting to know your own approach to tarot. Even if you've never picked up a deck before, it was like sitting down and thinking about certain questions, understanding your beliefs around how you think tarot works and like what level of magic you're kind of into, and how that's going to play into your practice with tarot. Like, what intentions are you bringing to your readings, right? And then, learning how to set boundaries and just kind of developing your relationships to the cards in general.
Yeah. I really like this kind of the way she went at it as well, because it's almost posing the question. It's like, okay, what are you expecting from the tarot? And is that realistic?
Yes.
And I was like, I really wish I would have come at, like, when I first found my first deck, I wish I would have really thought about that too. Cause I think I just would have been miles ahead, like
Mhm.
earlier on. So yeah.
Totally. And I love her transparency about her first experience with tarot. She says that she got this tarot deck and she sort of felt like it owed her something, right? It was supposed to hold
Mhm.
all of these secrets and all of these answers. And then it like she pulled some cards and like nothing happened, like she just didn't have that spark, or she didn't have that instant connection. And it's a super refreshing experience to read about, because I remember when I was first getting into tarot, I would listen to podcasts or I would read books or whatever. And all of the stories were like, well, I was in the womb when I first felt the call to tarot. And it's like, I'm exaggerating, but it was
Yeah,
all these stories of people who found it when they were young and immediately connected, and it's been in their life forever, and it's been this love affair. And I don't think I don't think it's impossible. Obviously, there's people out there that have had that
of course.
experience,
Of
but
course.
it's not my story. And the longer I've been reading tarot, the more I've talked to people that read tarot, it's really not that universal of a story. So I really appreciated that she shared it up front.
Yeah, especially with her being positioned as such, again, I don't want to say expert, but in the field, like she's
Sure.
such kind of out there and prominent.
Yeah, exactly. And it's important for somebody like her to say that, because, if you don't have that immediate connection with tarot, it doesn't mean that you're not an intuitive person. It
Yeah,
doesn't mean that you're not going to have a great relationship with it.
exactly. Like literally all it means is that you just didn't hit it off right away. That was it.
It could be the deck you bought. I mean, it
Yeah,
could just literally not, you might
it
not
could have
connect
been
with
the
that
day.
artwork. Yep.
It could have been just the day.
Yep.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I totally agree with this. And I just wanted to add, like, I get a little uncomfortable when I share my tarot story. Because of that reason. I don't want it to throw some people off who maybe didn't have that light bulb moment that I had so young. But with that said, the way I read the cards now doesn't look anything like it did when I first started. So even
Right.
though I had that light bulb moment, it didn't stick. So kind of basically what I wanted to say is like, even though I had that connection, it didn't mean squat in the long run.
Gotcha.
So,
Yeah.
and also a fun fact, the tarot actually made me nervous at first. I started with oracle cards and tarot made me nervous.
So nervous in what way? Like that it was gonna give you some scary messages that you weren't ready to
Mm,
deal with,
Not
or
well, it wasn't so much that, it was more of, the tarot just seemed to be more for an elite group who was quote
oh,
unquote better than me and had the generations before them who taught them and it was handed down. And because I was the first in anybody I knew to have a tarot deck or any oracle cards or anything. Like it was like not something I'd ever been exposed to. So I was like, well, I haven't been trained. I haven't
yes.
been, I don't have this in my blood or anything. So that's why it made me nervous. I was like, how dare I?
Oh, that's so interesting. I mean, I think I shared a similar response, but I don't know if it was nervous that came, like, because I heard a lot of the same things, like, the things I was just sharing, like people that have been reading since they were very young, or that it
Yeah.
ran in the family or stuff like that. So I felt that there was maybe I felt left out more than anything, I think.
Okay.
Yeah.
That's so interesting. Yeah. I think the reason I use the word nervous is almost, and it sounds silly actually to even articulate it, but it was like almost the tarot police were going to come out and say, you're not allowed to have, like,
Aw.
or, something like that. Like I just wasn't supposed to have them. So yeah.
Yeah. Aw. I'm so glad you don't feel that way. And if
Oh
anybody
God,
out
no.
there feels like that, there's no such thing, and you're
No.
welcome, and you're supposed to be
Yeah.
here. So
You know what? I am the tarot police and you are totally allowed to use them.
okay, so
Yeah.
there is a section in the book basically about the conversation or the conversation about sort of fate versus free will, or fate and free will. And I actually don't know how to tackle this part. It feels really big, this part of the book for me. I don't know if it
Yes.
felt like that for you,
It,
but
it did in a way, like, and it's so funny because I didn't actually think about it until I read your notes on it. I was like, oh, yeah, because to me, fate and free will, it's just not something I really think about all that much because they're just not big subjects for me.
hmm,
Not that they're not important. It's just I believe everything is free will. Nothing is,
okay.
So I was just really interested to kind of see you kind of talk about these notes that you made.
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting because as I was reading this section in the book, I was also taking the philosophy portion of my astrology course, and we were talking about the exact same
Oh,
thing. Basically, there are different approaches, and there's a couple of main ones, but then they break down into the beliefs that sort of overlap. But there's a couple of different approaches to astrology, and Basically, there are some that come from the school of thought that, everything is fated and it's all written in the stars, it's all there, right?
Mm.
Then there's kind of a modified version of that where, well, there's some things that are predetermined, but maybe it says that you're meant to become president, but the path that you take to get there has not been decided, right?
Okay.
And then there's also the idea that like everything is just random and it's all up to choice and chance and all that kind of stuff. And to be
Wow.
honest, it's not something that I ever really thought about before astrology either. And so it's something that I'm still kind of trying to figure out right now. Like I still don't know where I land on these things. But what I have been really thinking about lately is that, well, we can look ahead 10 years, let's say, right? And we can see where certain planets are going to be. And based on that, we can come up with predictive statements of what might happen, right?
Mm.
And then if those are to come true, there is some sense of that says to me, well, then that was already decided because it was already written out like that. So I don't know if I'm making sense, but
That makes total sense.
so, I mean, I even look at something like, before we started recording, I was talking about a particular transit that's coming up. And so that's already there. That's already something that I can look forward to and see, and not look forward to in the sense of like, oh, I'm anticipating it, but I can look ahead, like looking ahead in a calendar.
Yeah.
I can see that that day is coming. I can see that that energy is flowing in. I didn't make any decision for it to come. I didn't choose for it to
Oh,
come. It's just happening. So,
huh.
and then this idea that, I mean, we all
Okay.
have a birth chart. And if we believe in these things, if we believe in, and I mean, I know I'm taking this away from tarot, but I've really been thinking about it through the
No, this is
lens of
like brain
astrology
candy.
lately. So,
Please go on. Yeah.
um, but if I look at somebody's birth chart and I say it's quite possible that in, this part of life that these events will happen or these kinds of things will take place. If I believe in that, there has to be something about that
Right.
that says that that was already determined.
Okay.
So that's kind of where I'm at right now, and I don't think that we don't have free will. I think that that takes away a lot of our own power.
Yeah.
And you could easily turn that around and say, well, that person is a murderer because they were predetermined to be a murderer and they had no choice in the fact, right?
Yeah. Okay.
So I think that we do have some choice, but I also wonder if it's the illusion of choice and we were meant to make those choices anyway. And I don't know if that
Maybe.
really bothers me, to be honest, because I
Yeah.
still am experiencing choice.
Okay. Okay. So here's what I'm getting from all this is I think I had a completely different like inner definition of what fate means.
Okay.
Because to me, fate is like, there it doesn't matter what you do, A, B, and C are going to happen. That's it. And that's what I mean. Like, I believe more in free will, but I suppose looking at fate kind of the way the lens you're looking through it, fate is more of these are the energies you're working with. Now you choose how to use those. See, that's kind of how I work.
Yeah.
Oh,
And I mean,
uh,
I could be reading it in a different way as well. And maybe
yeah.
that's not what Liz was going for. And it's quite possible that because I was reading this at the same time as doing that part of the astrology course. One
But I
second.
love where your brain went, though. That's the thing. That was such a really interesting kind of train of thought, like a couple of trains of thought.
Yeah, and I mean, like I said, it's something that I still have uh, to be honest, I don't know if I genuinely care at the end of the day. Like
Yeah.
it's not keeping me awake at night, I guess. I think
Yeah.
it's also very interesting to think about and have conversations about and hear different points of view about. Like I was chatting with Tyler about it a couple of weeks ago and he said, "No, everything is just random. It's
Mm.
random and you can make choices, but it might not work out for you, but it's just like there's nothing that says anything is anything."
Okay.
And I was like,
That's
"All
like
right,
three
well,
completely different.
totally different, right?" And I was kind of like, well, then I don't know how you could like be into anything that I'm into kind of because
Yeah.
astrology says one thing. And I mean,
Yeah.
there are pathways within that. And of course, there's different interpretations within astrology too, right? So, anyways,
That almost sounds like a chaos magician statement. That's what that sounds like
yes.
to me. But yeah, I mean, I can see where he's coming from because, like, I think that some things are random. It's like it's almost like a clash of like a collective, like this person made this decision, this person made this decision, this person made this decision, and all three kind of clashed together and created a
Mm,
situation.
hmm.
So in that way, yes, I totally am like, yeah, that's random.
Well, and I think that's a great point where you bring in like that person made that decision, that person made that decision.
Hmm.
And Liz goes on to talk about stuff like this. And I think the
Yeah,
third part of the book, but it's like, yeah, I mean, any card we pull that says, okay, this is going to be okay, you pull a card of the day, this is what your day is going to look like, except for the
yeah,
fact that person B pulled a card that said the complete opposite and you're interacting with that person.
yeah,
So what now? Like, I mean,
yes,
nobody lives in a vacuum.
yeah,
So even if you, and I think maybe that's more what she was getting at is that like, even if you pull the tower, it doesn't mean that like everything's going to crumble around you. You know, like
exactly.
you have the power to then see that and be like, all right, well, how can I sort of remediate against that
Yeah,
essentially?
because I think the thing is exactly what you're saying. If you pull the tower, it's not saying that yes, absolutely A, B, and C are going to happen today. It's saying this could happen. So what are you going to do to change it?
Yeah.
So, and I mean, if you don't have any kind of free will or any way to change things that might happen, why bother with tarot? Why bother with astrology? Why bother with any of it?
Well, I think that's
You know?
also a fantastic point because yes, we can look at a birth chart and see events, or we can look ahead in time and see where the planets are going to be. We can pull a year ahead spread and we can know what December 2021 is going to look like. But what's the point? Like,
Yeah,
what's the point in knowing if there's then nothing you can do? Like, that's no
yeah.
fun.
Well, and see your example earlier, kind of about the presidency thing. You know, if your birth chart says you're going to grow up to be president, well, maybe you're going to be president of your own company, or
Mm,
maybe you're going to be president of the PTA.
right.
So it's almost like you have the potential and you get to decide how you're going to use that. Or, for instance, say you were saying to me, you know, next year, um, your stars are saying that you could, I don't know, win $1 million or whatever. You'll earn your first $1 million. Well, I can either choose to sit on my ass and wait for that $1 million, or I can choose to do the work and earn that $1 million. It's actually going to show up because if I sit on my ass, it's not going to come. You know what I mean?
Yeah. And I
So
mean, I guess if we're saying that it would come anyway, I mean, there's a difference in being handed $1 million and working your ass off for it. Like, I mean, either way, those are two different experiences of
for
life.
sure. Yeah. Sorry. I worded that. I didn't mean like
No,
win $1 million.
that's
I meant like you could say, you know, next year that money's going to come and either I can work for it and actually get it or sit on my butt and then realize a year from now, oh, I missed an opportunity.
right.
Yeah.
Yeah. So it's, I mean, it's super interesting. I feel like that could be a whole podcast into
Yes.
itself.
And like I said, that's why I was so excited to kind of see you kind of dive into all of your notes here because I was like, wow, that's super cool.
Yeah, I find it really, really fascinating. And I kind of hope I never decide what I think because it's way more interesting to just keep thinking about it. So just kind of going off the back of all of that astrology talk, I do want to make it very clear that astrology, you don't have to know it to do tarot. And if it makes you feel overwhelmed to think about like all of the astrological correspondences and how they connect, like just throw it away, get rid of it. You do not need to know it. You do not need to work with it. And the same goes for any other spiritual practice. In the book, Liz mentions things like Kabbalah, but these systems weren't created together to be a one for one for one. You know, like there are people that find it interesting to connect them and to make correspondences with them, but just don't worry about it if it's not working for you. You don't need to know all of these things. You can just read tarot, and that's perfectly fine. You know,
Yeah.
like I feel like I always go off on astrological tangents and I literally can't help it at this point because I'm like
That's why I
living
love
and
you.
breathing astrology.
That's why you're
But
the Astro Pro.
thank you. But it's like it's so just not necessary. So just as like a little disclaimer sort of.
Yeah. Yeah, and I think that's super duper important to remember, like, because I know in our episodes, of course, we talk about the elements and we talk about the numerology associations and astrology and all that. Just because we talk about it doesn't mean that's what you have to take in. It's interesting ways to look at it,
Mhm.
absolutely, and that's all. I think that's our purpose is just to kind of share these ideas, and you can take what works and leave behind what doesn't.
Oh, sure. I mean, I think for me at least, looking at tarot and astrology together has given I don't think that tarot has influenced the way I look at astrology, but astrology has certainly influenced the way that I look at
Hmm.
tarot. So it
Yes.
has just given me a different lens, different layers, but that's after a number of years of reading cards first.
Yes.
So,
That's true. Yeah. It comes with time, and I think it changes with time. I know it did for me. It's
yeah.
completely changed with time. So, I mean, there was another passage too that it kind of is related to this I'm going to quote it here. So, tarot originated in medieval Europe. Despite the intriguing myths that surround its history, it has a humble beginnings as simply a card game. And the reason that really jumped out at me was like it really drives home the fact that tarot is just what we make it. It's a deck of cards.
Yep.
It did not start, in ancient Egypt. It did not start, from some witch in a forest in Norway it's just cards.
Hmm.
They played, it was like bridge or something, I think. Well, not necessarily bridge, but something related to bridge.
Yeah, I think she said it was just a game that was very similar to
Yeah,
the styling
that's
of that or whatever.
exactly, exactly. So, and by understanding and accepting that, that kind of tells us there are no authorities on reading tarot, which circles back to what I was saying earlier when I was feeling nervous because I was afraid that tarot police were going to come and get me. Um, and that also means there's no established rules or more correct interpretation. So the way you see a card is correct. Whether anybody else sees it that way or not, it doesn't matter. If you see it that way, that is the right interpretation for you. So
Yes.
I think that's really important for tarot newbies to kind of get over is that fear of being wrong.
Yeah, and this leads into one of my favorite parts is that Liz says, intuition is just trusting in yourself, right? And tarot is just a tool to kind of validate that. So whatever you see on that card, as long as you're as long as you're kind of listening to yourself in that moment, then it's correct,
Yeah,
right?
exactly.
And then to the point about like, it can be wrong and all that kind of stuff. Like, I mean, I loved when she was talking about, pregnancy tests can be wrong. So why can't tarot be wrong?
Yes, like that's exactly it. Why do we hold tarot to such a huge high standard that's impossible to meet?
Yeah, exactly. I think that this book does a really good job. I mean, it's called The Power of Tarot, and I think that's for a very good reason. I mean, one of the
Yes.
last lines in the book is like you look inside yourself and you find the power of tarot. It's a very empowering book.
Yep, it really is.
I guess the last thing I'll say about this section, and feel free to say anything else if you've got more. But when Liz was talking about this idea that, she didn't have that love at first sight experience with tarot and she did want to go and learn more about it and understand the structure and stuff. It really reminded me of our conversation with Bobby from Outsider Tarot. Like, he kind of had the same situation and he wanted to, especially before he created his own deck, he really wanted to understand the history and the systems and the structure of tarot. And I think that I'm glad I'm hearing more stories like that because I think it's just really cool to for people to hear that like maybe do take that more methodical, more logical approach of like wanting to understand the breakdown of things and actually reading this book and breaking the tarot down by these different things, even though that's kind of what we've been doing on this podcast. And I hadn't realized it until I started reading this book. It's so useful. It just becomes so digestible.
Yeah, and I mean, I remember that conversation with Bobby, and I remember thinking while he was like explaining his process and learning, like you said, about the structure, it was almost like he was like this engineer that was just trying to figure out how it worked, like the nuts and
Totally.
bolts and the gears. And I really admire that. I can't do that. That's a completely difficult thing. I know I can identify systems and like see them in the tarot, but I can't work with them like that. So it's really inspiring to see other people with that kind of mindset really flourish with it.
All right. Well,
Well,
let's
should we move in?
yeah,
Oh,
let's move on to part 2, which is called
yeah.
To Read Tarot. And for me, sort of the overall part of this or the overall sort of summary for this part was basically what we were just kind of leading into this idea that there are different systems, there are different ways of breaking down the deck. And this is the part that really reinvigorated my love for certain aspects, like the elements, like I'm going to keep talking about. And I think this is the part of the book that maybe beginners, you might want to skip the first part on your first read through and just get to this part because I think it can just offer a new lens for certain aspects.
Yeah.
All right. Well, I know we both were a big fan of this, but I was so happy. Like, I literally clapped. I'm not kidding. Liz just right out the gate dispels the myth that somebody else needs to buy you a tarot deck for your first tarot deck, that it needs to be gifted. And I'm just
That
like,
is so not true.
so not true. Stop waiting to live your life. If you want a tarot deck, and you know what? If you really like the idea of it being gifted, wrap it and give it to
Give it to
yourself.
yourself. Yes.
Yes.
See?
Okay.
We're on the same wavelength.
I
I did.
hate that stupid myth. I think it's so silly.
It is.
Ugh, it drives me crazy. It's just like it's one of those things that takes all the power away from somebody.
It really does. Because the thing is A, do it yourself. Like, you don't have to rely on somebody else to give you something this beautiful. And second, if you're choosing your deck, you're going to choose one that you're actually attracted to.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, I was just so happy.
But also, I mean, there are plenty of people that probably don't feel comfortable telling anybody that they want a
Yes.
tarot deck. And so what are they supposed to do?
Yeah,
Like,
just wait around for it magically to happen. No.
yeah, no, make the magic yourself. Go get it.
Yes. I've bought myself so many tarot decks. So
Mm-hmm.
many.
Mm-hmm.
Too many. We're just going to leave it at that. Too
We've
many.
seen your collection. All
Uh,
right. Yeah. So let's just talk about the Major Arcana then.
do it.
I noticed that you did this little exercise that she
I
suggests, which was
did.
to lay the cards out from the Fool to the World and kind of check out what sequences are occurring. And I think she kind of talked about it as, the Fool's journey. We hear this quite often, but what
Yeah.
if you were the Fool card walking through each of the Major Arcanas? Like, who are you meeting on the journey and what are they teaching you? I thought that was really fascinating. So you did it. So
Yeah.
tell us about it.
All right. So what I did is I laid out all the majors kind of in front of me, like as if it was a big path, right? It was a long one. And so I took the Fool and I started him like before the Magician. So he started at the Magician. He was facing away from the Magician, right? Because he's walking off the cliff, right? Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
So, and I was like, okay, so what are we seeing? How are they interacting and whatnot? And then I moved him to the other side of the Magician. So he's between the Magician and the High Priestess. So then he's not facing the High Priestess, but he's looking back at the Magician.
Mm-hmm.
And I was like, wait, what does that mean? So I started thinking, I'm like, okay, so we have to look back to see what we're learning from these lessons as we're moving through this. So we're not going to see them coming. And so I kind of walked
Ooh.
him through every single one. And even I geeked out. So even like when he was between two cards, so say the Magician and the High Priestess,
Yeah.
I was like, okay, so what is she saying to him? And why is he looking back at the Magician about it? Is she asking him questions? Like, I just went crazy with it and it was fun.
Oh, that
And
sounds really
I just
fun.
wanted to geek out.
Yeah, I honestly never even thought about the fact that he would be, or that they, like the Fool, would be
Yes.
looking away from essentially each card that you put it next to on that side anyway, right? Like on the left side, it's always gonna be facing away.
Right.
In the Smith
So
weight, anyways, I guess we should say.
yeah, the Smith
But
weight. Yeah. When I talk about doing these, I usually use the Smith weight just because it's easy to access.
Yes. Yeah. Fair enough. Wow, that's super interesting.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think that's a great exercise to do, though. And that is definitely something that I'm going to go back for. So,
Highly recommend.
all right. So, when Liz is kind of comparing the major arcana to the minor arcana, she says that the majors are more like the overall spiritual work versus the minors kind of being the day to day. And I think you have a really good note here because I was kind of like, I think it's all spiritual work and the majors are sort of the big picture and the minors are more the day to day. But why don't you go into your note?
Like, and I agree. I think that the majors are kind of like the bigger, maybe outside influences that we don't necessarily have control over. It's just the energies we're working in, and the minors are that day to day, our tasks and our interactions. But I think I understand what she was meaning by this, but the wording just didn't sit quite right. Later on in the book, she kind of goes further into it in a different way, which I kind of helped. But the small day to day magic is kind of what makes up the spiritual. So I don't feel like they're one or the other. They're both like, you can't have the big magic unless you have the little magic inside of that. Like that's what makes it up. It's the building blocks.
Yeah, I feel like in a sense we're all saying the same thing, but it is interesting and I think useful to look at the majors as more of like a Just that big picture kind of stuff. Like, I
Yeah.
don't think anyone ever explained it that way before. It always was like, oh, they're archetypes. And like, that's never really resonated with me so much. Like, I get
Yeah.
it, but it just never worked for me.
Yeah. I mean, I've been able to see it as both. Archetypes is kind of, I don't know if that's the right word, but kind of like personality traits that you can take on as you're working through a situation. So it's like, okay, I'm facing A, B, and C today. I really need that Empress energy. So that kind of way. But yeah.
All right, well, let's talk about a few things in the minor arcana section. I did really like how she said, messages won't always be magical, but they might instead remind us to find magic in the mundane. I feel like she's been listening to our podcast.
Yeah, maybe.
Um, and then I really liked this sentence. So, through the minor arcana, we are reminded that friendships, careers, successes, and masterpieces are often built over long periods of time with stops and starts and small adjustments made along the way. I think that's a really great way of looking at the
Hmm.
minors and remembering that there's nothing really minor about them,
Yes,
to get
exactly.
cheesy.
Well, yeah, that's true though. Like everything has a consequence and every like good or bad. And these little we call them mundane interactions with people and places and things, they do make up that big picture like we were just saying. So they are important. They're not I don't know, they're not to be overlooked.
Yes.
So it's interesting because I looked at page 88 in my ebook and I was like, that's just a really weird quote. But it's because your page numbers are way different from mine.
Yeah.
But I was waiting for that and now it makes sense. I get it.
Oh my gosh, it'd be great if the top of 88 was just like the continuation of one sentence, just like a few words. That's
I
so
think
funny.
it was. I'm opening up now really quick just to show you. Upon someone else, offer it up by saying, this is what I'm feeling. I'm not sure what it means for you. So I'll just put it back out there. I was like, okay, all right.
Awesome. I
Yep,
mean, didn't you find that so profound?
I did. I totally did. I was curious as to where you were going to go with it. And then it just occurred to me as you were speaking, I was like, oh, right. So do with that
Amazing.
information what you will.
I love it. I'm glad we both brought our page 88 into the mix.
It's a good one. It's a good one. 88 never failed. Well, I mean, in the minor arcana stuff, I really like that she was. I'll just actually, there's a quote. So we might look at some of the court cards, and instead of being inspired, we could feel repelled. And that
Hmm.
really illustrated how the minors depict real everyday life. It's not always roses and rainbows. So I really like that she brought that realness into it rather than just focused on the light and fluffy stuff.
Yep.
So and then she makes a suggestion that the minors are where we find like quote unquote the work that we can do like ourselves, like our inner work or whatever. So what we have control to change.
Yeah, I really like that too. I'm surprised I didn't write down that note, but that was such a that helped me kind of reframe that idea of archetypes, I guess, with the majors. Like, okay, these are things that are happening that are, again, I guess, big picture. It's just the words big picture make more sense to me. But
Yeah.
yeah, this idea that the minors are something that we can, really grasp and
Yeah.
um yeah.
Yeah. I like the way you use the word big picture because it's like the big picture that's made up of all the minors. So I
Right.
like that you use that terminology just for the record.
Okay, cool. I mean, I don't know. Like archetypes is fine and it's obviously a
Yeah.
legitimate way of looking at things. It's just I don't know. Maybe big picture will help other people too, hopefully.
Yeah. Yeah. Archetypes to me, it's almost when I think of archetype, I think it's like a mask you put on. It's not authentic. And I think that's why
Yeah.
I have an aversion and it's just me. I know it's just me, but I have an aversion to the word archetype.
Yeah, I'm not a fan. What I am a fan of, though, is how Liz talks about the elements. I just loved the way that she talked about it and the way that I mean, because beforehand, it's like, of course, I knew about the elements in the cards, and of course, I took them into account, but just not ever in this way. Like the way she talks about it being the weather of a situation. So if you were to pull a whole bunch of wands, like there's a lot of heat. Things are burning up in this situation. There's a lot of passion, but it could be like just being angry, like feeling heat in that way, right? Or if you pull a lot of maybe pentacles, maybe even some cups, then like things are really growing for you. Things are really abundant. And like, you don't need to even look at the images on the cards to bring those things through. I mean, you can literally just think about earth, air, fire, water. Think about what those things bring to a situation in terms of temperament, let's say, or temperature or feeling in that way. And then like read like that. And I think that's so cool. I mean, I honestly got lost in these pages and I didn't take a lot of notes because I was just enjoying what I was reading. Like the keywords that she uses just and the ways she combines them. I mean, the fact that she gave each of the elements a different speed, fire being the fastest and earth being the slowest, it all really it got me going. I loved it.
Yeah.
It was so powerful for me.
Yeah. I honestly, because I think you brought it up in IG Live and maybe in one of the other episodes we were recording. And I just love how passionate it made you. Like it was
Oh,
just like
yes.
your Queen of Wands energy was just like, bam, this is
Totally.
awesome. No, I have to agree. It was a really interesting. I mean, of course, we have talked about, I think, on the show about how the
Yeah.
elements kind of play into the cards. So it's not like it's a new concept. It's just like a really neat lens for this concept. And I really liked it.
Yeah, I feel like elements have never jumped off the page so much as they have here. And again, I think maybe it's just certain keywords that she uses and because she does go through combinations. So she'll talk about, pulling a lot of cups with a lot of wands, let's say, right? And just I don't know that I've seen that anywhere else. And I don't know that I've seen anything beyond the typical like okay, hot, wet, cold, I don't
Yeah.
know, dry. Like it's very nice to hear some different ideas and how they might actually show up day to day.
Yeah. It turned them into actions, not just adjectives,
Yeah.
you know? And I mean, I really like the way that she talked about how the elements work with each other. Like, I think it would help to combine card meanings in a reading. So, like,
Yeah.
if you have two cards beside each other, you can figure out how they're working together just based on the elements. So, for an example, she was talking about fire and air, and that's putting the two fastest elements together. So that can mean things spread, quote unquote, like wildfire, right?
Like I read that and I was like, "Doy, this is
Yeah,
genius,"
right. It was great. It was just one of those things. I was like, this is new and I like it.
Mhm.
So, and then I also like she posed the question, how can, air help me and how can it
Right.
harm? And I was like, that's really interesting. So, since you're looking at it from both angles, maybe that's a way if say a new tarot reader wants to learn how to do reversals, that might be a really interesting place to start just based on the elements,
Mm.
how it can help if it's upright or harm when it's reversed.
Oh, wow, that's a cool idea. Yeah. Well, loved it. It was a great chapter. Like I said, I'm already really using that a lot right now. So can't wait to just keep moving with it. So let's talk about court cards. I like that she addressed the difficulty with connecting with court cards. I think that's a very common issue for a lot of people. It remains an issue for me, honestly. I do not connect super well with the court cards. There are different, there's days when I connect better and certain decks that I connect better with, but
Hmm.
um and I like that she talks about how there's authority and hierarchy and social status wrapped all up in those 16 cards. And honestly, it feels like that part of the deck is kind of stuck in medieval times. Like we do not really use these systems in our day
Yeah.
to day lives anymore, at least not in the countries that we're living in. So,
Yeah. Yeah.
and we are in one country, but Tarot Coven
I
Cast
gotcha.
is an international podcast,
Yeah.
which, I would
Yeah. Our
assume
community
that
is everywhere.
yeah, but I think for the most part, we're not living in societies that have these structures anymore. So, and her idea of of limiting the cards to just energies or just people, I agree that that isn't helpful.
No.
Although it could be a good inroad for you. That said, it might also just restrict you later on. So I don't know. You got to figure out what works
Yeah.
for you and leave the rest as always. But yeah,
Yeah, I think it's a good tool to have in your toolbox to grab at, but I don't think it should be your only method of reading those cards at
yeah,
all.
yeah.
Mm. And I mean, so I was really digging the outlining kind of the underlying themes of the like roles or experiences in her rundowns of the court cards. Like so for example, in back in the day, the pages were actually children. They were like the apprentices of the knights,
Right.
right? So they were
Yes.
brought in. So that follows kind of the general consensus of tarot, that they would have been students, learners, dreamers. So that's like your personalities. But we can also translate that to like inner child work,
Mm-hmm.
picking up a new skill, opening, like being open to learning a new idea or perspective, going for training work or something to that effect. Like we can change it to not just be like as a personality thing or a, you know, who you like
Right.
your person.
Yeah.
So I really like that. And it kind of, the whole thing also circles back to like, I nerd out about historical stuff. Like it's no secret. History is like my thing. But so in traditional decks with the references, it's kind of like a snapshot of the everyday life of the past. I don't like hierarchy. That's no secret. But for me, the courts, I look at them as if I'm playing like cribbage. So they're all
Mm-hmm.
worth 10 points. They're all equal. So there's no
Sure.
hierarchy for me. So,
I like
you know,
that.
um, but yeah, and I mean, for better or for worse, it does give us kind of a historical idea of what some societies looked like at that time.
Oh yeah, I mean, like, listen, that's when tarot was being created. I mean,
Yeah.
that's it is what it is. But
Yeah.
I'm I'm excited about decks that switch it up.
Yeah.
I mean, even the wild unknown, like I don't know that I'm super into like the family structure, but I at least like the way that it deviates
It's
from king
changed.
and queen.
Yeah.
But again, just to mention Bobby and Outsider Tarot, I'm really looking forward to his reinterpretation of those 16 cards because as we talked about, like it's just all element based. So with
Yeah.
my newfound love for elements,
Oh, you're going to just
we're gonna be
drink
best
those
friends.
up. It's going to be great. Yeah. Adding on to that, I think it's really also too, if we can see the historical, traditional kind of depictions and see the contrast with all these new decks that are coming out, I think that's just delicious. I love to see that transformation because it
Hmm.
reflects how we've transformed as a people, as a society as
Yes, very
well.
true. We do have an upcoming episode on the court cards, so I think we'll, save the rest of our conversation for
Yeah.
them for that episode.
Yeah, I think so.
All right, well, let's talk a little bit about the formulating questions section. I did feel incredibly bad while reading this section because I was like, oh yeah, the amount of time that I've asked, oh, just like a general, just like pull a card for whatever. And I'm like, damn, that is like really annoying. And I know it's annoying because I've had people do it to me and I'm like, well, okay. I mean, I have no way to direct this for you, but I don't know. It is a sticky area of readings because, like questions, even if you have a specific question, it can be kind of subjective. Like she talks about this situation where she had a client that was asking, is this a good time for me to take a year off and focus on a creative project? And for her, what creative project meant was completely different than what the client had meant, which was taking a year off to travel to be inspired for the creative project, right? So,
Yeah.
I
Yeah.
mean, we need to be more we need to define our questions better. But if you are reading for somebody else, that can be tricky because it's like, I don't know, one or both of you could be a little bit shy or nervous about what's being asked or what you're asking. And so I get it. It can be a sticky area of readings,
Yeah.
but I think the most important thing about formulating questions is that the better your question, the more clarity there's going to be during the reading and the more empowered the reading turns out to be, right?
Hmm. Yeah, I like when you're stuck, like this is just a bit of advice, not from the book, but if you're ever stuck with that, where you just want to know generally, you don't know what to ask, or you have a sitter, a queer, somebody you're reading for, who just doesn't know what they want to ask, you pull a card, and your question is, what should they be asking about?
Ooh.
And that can open up a conversation, and then they can start asking questions, and it can, so if they are shy or a little nervous or not sure what to expect, it kind of opens it up a little bit and says, okay, we're just going to talk. This isn't like a big mystical, it can be a mystical experience, but
Right. That's a
yeah,
really great piece of advice. I love that.
there you go.
I think that you could probably even use there's so many times that I wanna just take out my deck, shuffle, and pull cards, but I don't actually have a question. I just wanna connect with the cards,
Yeah,
and I think that I'm gonna use that from now on.
yeah, do that. It's like having a conversation with your cards. And I mean,
Yes. Which it
I guess
should
technically,
be.
well, and it should, yeah, definitely. And it's almost like having a conversation with your inner self as well, like your subconscious.
Absolutely. Yeah.
So
Ooh, I love that. That's a great piece of advice.
there you go. Free for you. I just wanted to mention I am so here. Liz mentioned about people expecting a reader to just kind of read your mind. if you're sitting down for a reading.
Yeah.
That is a huge, like, gets under my skin so bad. And it always has. And I was really happy to hear her talk about it.
Yes. And
And
she doesn't pull any punches either. She's just like,
no,
I love that
I
story that
love
she
it.
shared about the woman that came in that was like, oh, it's a great day. I finally was able to get a sitter for my kid, but you already
Yes.
know that, I'm sure. And Liz was like,
Yeah.
no, like,
And
why would
didn't
I
believe
know
her when
that?
she said
Oh
it.
my God, I was
I was
so
like,
aggravated for Liz.
I know, me too. But then I was like, oh my God. But no, I mean, that is actually part of the reason why I stepped away from reading professionally for a couple of years.
Oh,
Because
wow.
I could not stand the people that just wanted a sideshow.
Yeah.
And I was like, that's not what I'm here for. I don't have anything to prove to you. You're coming to me for advice. Do you want it or not?
Yes,
That's it.
exactly. Yeah.
And yeah, so it was really good to see her just, there it is right in front of you.
Yeah, I do really appreciate that about her personality, that she's just very, I don't know, like, I don't think open book is the right way to say it, but and blunt isn't quite the right word either, but just very, I don't know, straightforward, I guess,
Yeah,
but
it's just right there and that's
yeah.
it.
So let's move on to the section just basically about reading the cards. And a big part of this was talking about like putting your biases aside, which kind of leads into or leads out from the whole thing of formulating questions and how it can be kind of subjective. But I mean, what, like, how you've been reading a lot longer than I have, and you've read more for other people than I have for sure. So, what is your approach to like checking your biases when you're reading?
Yeah, well, I mean, first of all, I want to admit that like being unbiased isn't always my first reaction. It's taken
Sure.
practice that
Yeah.
my first response wasn't a biased opinion. And by bias, I don't mean judgment. I never judge ever, ever, but biased as in if I think um, my sitter would do well to, I don't know, leave their husband or something. That's just a random example. I'm not going to tell her to do that, even though my bias would say it's not a healthy relationship, get out.
Right.
So that's the kind of thing I'm talking about when I say a bias. So what I've learned is just to take a breath and think about why am I looking at it through that biased lens? And I just try to shift it. So 9 times out of 10, it's because I've been triggered myself, like good or bad, in some way by a past experience or a thought pattern or something like that. So I have to just remind myself that it's not about me.
Right.
I'm human and I try really hard just to give messages as unfiltered as possible. And then there's also too, like I have before in my mind, my inner voice, I've said, who the hell are you to make an assumption? Who the hell are you to draw that conclusion? That's not for you. That's not what the message says. You just tell them what the message says and don't, your opinions are not appropriate here. So it's almost like
Right.
you have to give yourself that hard kick in the arse sometimes.
So you just have to give yourself a talking to.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, it doesn't happen often anymore, but
Yeah, I assume that with, the just the more years of experience that just becomes a little bit easier every time.
it does. It does.
Cuz I mean, I have to be honest, like it's definitely something that I'm still working on, and I guess I kind of pair judging and being biased in the same kind of thing. And it's not that I want to be a judge, but I don't know. Like I'm just thinking about certain situations. For example, what you were just talking about. I am I'm not great at keeping that stuff to myself. Like I just want to tell somebody, especially I think in a situation like what you just brought up, I just want to be like, girl, you need to go.
Yeah.
Like,
Like,
and I find that really hard. And I'm sure
yeah.
everyone does. And it's just a skill that you have to develop. But I'm
Yeah.
almost hoping that when I'm in a situation like that, the cards that come up will be like, well, it's there. So I get to tell them anyway, you know?
This is the 6 of Swords. You need to leave.
Right?
you
So
know? Yeah.
yeah.
But there are ways though. There are ways to work it in. To a like say taking that same situation. It's not a healthy relationship, whatever. Chances are it's going to like if that's really a concern, it's probably going to show up in the cards and you're going to see it and that's why it's triggering that, right? But you
Right.
don't necessarily have to say you're not in a healthy relationship. You need to leave.
True.
You could say it looks like there might be some, some tense energies or something that's not working for you within this relationship. Do you think that maybe you should talk to somebody about it? I really think
Right.
it would do well, and then say, I know of a few counselors or I know of a hotline that you can call completely free of charge. I'm happy to give that to you if you'd like it. And then you're leaving it in their court, but it's there.
So there's like ways to finesse your opinion
Yes,
into the conversation.
kind of, yeah. But see, I say I reserve that only for those kind of situations where I am actually like concerned.
Fair enough. Yeah.
you know,
Yeah. And I think
like
that's fair. And I mean, as tarot readers, we're not counselors, we're not
exactly,
psychiatrists, like we're not obligated to do anything for anybody really.
exactly.
Even if there's harm happening, but it's really hard not to want to do something, but I think that's
Yeah,
human nature
'cause
and I don't know, but
you don't get into this kind of line of work if you don't care about people.
that's a very good point. Yeah.
So,
I think
but
what I really liked, and I can't remember if Liz was exactly tying this into keeping your biases in check, but the advice of staying on card I thought was really helpful because yes, there are times that as I'm going through a reading, something will just come to me. And I have been doing my best to kind of just like, okay, make a note of that, but it doesn't necessarily need to come out. Let me stick to what's happening here on this card. And it doesn't mean I'm like ignoring guides or intuition or anything like that. It's just that this is a card. Let me read that first and then kind of bring that in. And then I think staying focused on what the card is in front of you can help just shut everything else out too.
yeah, it was really interesting because my first reaction to that was like, but when a message comes, a message comes.
Mm-hmm.
But then, in my mind, I'm like, okay, but if you get a certain card and you're getting this side message, that doesn't mean that that message is exactly what they need to hear. Maybe that message is, maybe that's telling you how these two different cards work together, or maybe that's something completely different issue that needs to be brought up with a different card. Or so,
Maybe
yeah,
it's
it
for
was interesting.
you.
Or maybe it's for you. Yeah, but that's always possible in any reading. Chances are something's going to come up that speaks to you as well.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, there's one little part where Liz says like about getting cards that you don't like.
Mm-hmm.
And she's like, no, don't shuffle them and put them back. The cards you get are the cards you get. Work with them. And I was like, yes,
Listen, I am so guilty of that. I mean, not
I am
anymore, but
too.
I was very guilty of that.
Oh
Like,
no, I
um,
am too.
I, I mean, I think it still happens to a smaller extent now. Like, if I'm just shuffling and something comes up, I'm like, I don't feel like looking at that one. I'll put it away. But I'm not in like a serious full on reading at the time. Like, there were times before, and I mean, like, whatever, they'd be fine cards. They just like weren't speaking to me for whatever reason. So I'd put them
Yeah,
back in, shuffle the deck. Guess what came out? The same fucking cards.
same
So, like,
cards.
why did
Of
I try
course.
to ignore them?
Yep. Yep.
Yeah.
Been there. That's where clarifiers come in.
Yes, very true.
Yeah.
Or you have to kind of stop and be like, listen, am I just not in the mood for it right now? Because that's okay.
Yeah.
Don't force yourself. Like, if you, and I think
Yep.
that's honestly what was going on with me is that, like, I know when I first started reading, I would do reading after reading after reading after reading,
Oh
different
yeah.
questions, different topics, but like,
Mhm.
I got burnt out. And then I'd see cards and be like, oh, I just like, I want to end the night on a good note. I'm going to put those back in, pull again.
Yeah.
And clearly the cards were like, girl, go to
Go to
sleep.
bed.
Like,
Yeah.
enough. Like,
Yeah.
death this time literally means go to sleep.
Yeah. Well, and I find like anytime I get stuck on that, I'm like, okay, I don't like this card. I don't want it. Instead of putting it back in the deck, I'll put a number in my head. It'll be like, 7 or something. And so I'll go on Google and I'll just Google that card and then I'll go to the seventh link.
Oh.
And then that's the reading for the card. That's it. That's what I get. And
You
if I don't like
have
it, I don't like it.
so many cool little tips and tricks. Like, I think there's a book in there somewhere for you.
Oh, that would be fun. I would do
Yeah.
that.
Just
I'm
all
up for
those
it.
little tips like that. Like, oh, if you don't know what question to ask, just pull a card and then start a conversation. I mean, all of these are so fantastic. And I think you only get them when you've been reading for so many years because you've come up with
Maybe.
little tips and tricks for yourself. So,
Well, maybe I'll have to do another book.
mm-hmm.
I'm here for it.
So listen, so are we. So. All right. Well, shall we dive into the third and final part to
Yeah.
live tarot?
Yes. This I think might have been my favorite part.
I think
I
so
think.
too. I mean, I really did enjoy the second part. Again, just breaking things down into different systems. But this is where it kind of focuses on how tarot is going to come into your everyday life, right? Like how to use it,
Mhm.
how to approach certain types of cards or readings. And it actually really addresses some of the tougher stuff, I think, too. And just again, very like how tarot can work practically, which I think is kind of Liz's jam, basically. So, okay. So, the first part of part 3, kind of talks about timing. And I was actually really, I don't know, it was a refreshing way of approaching this. This is not at all the way that I thought that this chapter was going to go. I mean, for me, it was really more about trusting in timing, not
Mhm.
necessarily using like, oh, because the Pentacles suit is Earth and Earth is the slowest element, then, that would be the slowest thing to sort of manifest, something like that,
Yeah.
right? So I
Yeah.
really liked the approach, and I wanted to know what your approach to timing in general with tarot was, or is, I guess I should say.
Yeah. Well, I mean, it changes. It changes by situation.
Right.
I don't usually do timelines, and I think it's because there's just too many factors. Because remember how we were saying earlier, well, one person makes this choice, another person makes this choice, and then things can change. So when you give timing on something, I think sometimes it can almost discourage people when they don't get the results when they're quote unquote supposed to get them.
Right.
So I try not to disempower. And I mean, this could also be because me and time have a very complicated relationship. I don't like time. I don't do time. I don't like linear time at all.
Hmm.
I mean, to the point where I have tons of clocks in my house and they're all stopped. There's no working clocks except for the digital one on my stove
That's
because I don't
incredible.
like them.
I love the fact that you just have not working clocks around the
Oh yeah,
house.
I have one, two, I have two right in front of me right here in my office. I love clocks, but I like them when they're stopped.
There's something really magical about that.
Yeah, it's because I make the rules. That's why.
Yes.
Um, but yeah, like so the reason it's like when you're giving timing for something, people if they assume it's going to happen, that's going to affect the way that they move forward, right? So the fact like when you're doing a tarot reading, you're saying, okay, well, by this time this should happen. Well, that's based on the fact of the person is going to be doing exactly like the same path that they're on right now. But once
Right.
they know something's going to happen, they're going to behave differently. And it might affect that. And it could just like, fuck up the whole deal.
Right. Yeah, and then I see sort of further down in our notes, that you struggled. I guess that's kind of what you were talking about. Like this is why you struggled with this section mostly because you're just not this huge fan of linear time.
Yeah.
But I wonder how you feel about the idea that let's say you pull a card and nothing sort of comes to fruition with it.
Mhm.
What do you think then if something shows up like 8 years later? Like Liz does have this story about how she looks back at a tarot reading and kind of sees
Yeah.
how it came true. I mean, how much stock do you put in that kind of idea?
Um, I mean, I think it's perfectly plausible.
Yeah.
I think honestly, if I'm being totally honest, I think that's probably more plausible than like having a set time and having everything happen exactly
Right.
when you say. Because I think we have this, we don't see time as cycles. So if, say, I pull something and it says, oh, yeah, this is going to happen in spring. Well, in what spring? Spring
Mhm.
next year or 5 years from now? Or so definitely, I totally can see that. Yeah.
What's so interesting is that I was really thinking about that whole concept in a very linear way, and then you said, "But time well, we don't think about it as time being a cycle, and yet I feel like we definitely should." And then you just kind of like broke open that whole thing for me of because I was a little like hesitant to believe that I pull a card tomorrow and then I see it manifest 8 years from now only because like there's just so many things happening between
Hmm.
today and 8 years from now that like I think you can put so many different qualifiers and quantifiers and lenses around that like how
Yeah.
do you know that that's exactly leading back to that reading, but I'm also super into like any TV show that deals with wonky timelines or has like a weird time loop or oh, what are those called? Like a oh, I can't think of it, but when basically everything feeds into itself and it's all leading back to the same place. But anyways,
Oh, yeah.
regardless, the idea of like, yeah, this could happen in spring, but it's spring 20 years from now.
Yeah.
I
Yeah.
love that idea.
Well, it's almost like yeah, you're interested in quantum physics then, right? In the quantum realm and quantum science.
Sure. I guess. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, so here's the thing. Okay, I might be wrong. I don't think I am, but I might be wrong. But Albert Einstein, I believe, he proposed the idea that actually everything that we view as past, everything that we view as future, everything that's not this moment is actually occurring at the exact same time in the exact same space, just on different um, dimensions, I guess is the word I'll use.
I
So
love
basically,
it.
and there was a theory that when we see a ghost, a so-called ghost, we're actually just seeing another timeline just merging with ours. And sometimes we're just
Whoa.
more aware of it and more attuned to it than others. So that's always something too that gets right into the quantum stuff. And it's really powerful healing. Like say you have some childhood trauma. Okay.
Yeah.
So you can meditate on that and kind of go back to that moment and then decide a different way. Like you can either hold yourself as a child or create a new way of whatever it was that occurred. So if something terrible happened, then maybe in in the reality that you're just going back to, you're changing that and you're completely avoid whatever it was that happened. And it's not changing what actually happened, but what it's doing is changing it's shifting the energy around that imprint in your mind.
Wow.
So that's, yeah. And that they call that working in the quantum realm.
That is awesome. I need a TV show about this right now. I love everything that you just said. We're not using video tonight because my internet sucks. But if you could have seen my face, like my jaw dropped, my eyes went wide. I was like, yes, yes, more of this. Like I was like eating it up.
Yeah.
That is so cool. And the first thing I thought of was when you said that idea about the ghost thing was in Outlander in like the very first episode when they look out the window and they see the
Oh,
ghost of
yeah.
Jamie. I'm like,
Yes.
whoa.
That the perfect example is that it's all just happening at the same time.
Yes.
And it's the same like the movie The Others, the same kind of
Oh,
idea, right? Like it's just occurring and they're not really aware of each
I
other.
just got chills. I
But
am so into this.
yeah,
So cool. But I'm just super grateful that you took that idea and flipped it on its head for me because I was like, well, what do you think about this idea of linear time? And you're like, no, no, no,
hey,
no, no, it's a
it's what I
cycle.
do. It's what I do. See, this is what happens when you leave a druid alone in the forest. They think,
But then when you come back to community and you share, it's so rich and juicy. I
yeah,
love it.
you know, 200 years ago, I would have been probably committed, but that's fine. It's
What a
fine.
shame, right? I
I
know.
know.
I mean, you're probably 100% correct, and that sucks. Thank goodness you live now. Okay, well, do you want to talk about the section on love and tarot?
Sure.
I was very surprised by this. How about you? About Liz Worth's approach to all of this idea of like third party readings.
It kind of irked me.
Okay, yeah, I mean, I think that's fair. She gives this for anybody that maybe doesn't know, there's often this thing of like people may come to you with a question about another person and they want you to pull cards for that person
Yeah.
essentially, right?
Yep.
And Liz made this analogy to a therapist, like what if a client said that or what if they said to a client you can only talk about yourself, so you can't talk about any of your past, relationships or current relationships or anything like that. And I think, like, I get it, but there is a difference between a tarot reader and a therapist, and
Yeah.
there's a difference between talking about somebody and I think pulling cards for somebody.
Yeah.
And I'm kind of seeing it both ways now. Before reading this, I was very much of the mind of like, no, let's pull cards for you. But I do wonder now if like pulling cards, I wonder if you can just shift and reframe that and be like, sure, we can pull cards that represent the other person, but we're still talking about you. Does that
Mhm.
make sense?
It does. And I think too, I think this kind of requires a little bit of clarity because yes, of course, a therapist saying like you can't talk about anybody else. Well, of course, you're talking about them in relation to you and the effect they're having on
Yes.
you. That's not a third party thing. That's not you asking someone to quote unquote spy on somebody. So there's a big rift between,
Right.
I think. So that's why that analogy really didn't work for me.
Yeah.
And so in my practice, I will, unless someone is a consenting participant in that reading, I will not pull cards that are going to be invasive. I am
Hmm.
all about consent, right?
Yeah.
And so like, of course, if someone says, hey, I need, I don't know, I'm having some troubles at work. Can you tell me if there's something about maybe the effect a coworker's having on them? Of course, I'm going to tell them about
Right.
that. That's affecting them directly, but I'm not going to, for instance, like, I've been asked before, so I actually made a note of this example because I thought it would illustrate it. It's like I've been flat out asked, "Is my ex-husband seeing anyone?" That's none of your
Yeah.
fucking business, first of all. Like it's not your business. If it's your ex, they are no longer your business. Period.
But also, I feel like that's not a question that the tarot can answer.
Well, true. I mean, it probably, I mean, I'm not going to say it can't. It probably could in a way,
Sure.
but
Maybe it's better to say like it's not the best use of tarot.
yeah, yeah, exactly. Like to me, asking something like that is like you're basically asking me to like follow this guy home, peek in
Yeah.
his windows, and then that's where I will not ever do anything like that.
What was that show in like the early 2000s, late 90s? Was it called Cheaters? Where they would follow people around to
I
see if
don't
they were
know.
cheating? I feel like that's what it was called. And it's like,
I
we're not cheaters, people.
I don't think I ever saw that show, but
Oh, it's bad. It's
exactly,
so bad.
exactly.
But like,
Yeah. But yeah, no, I do find that some people kind of use tarot as like a gossip tool, and that it mm-mm, not for me.
yeah. Yeah. I think maybe, again, this was another section where maybe the wording just wasn't like vibing with us or whatever.
Yeah, yeah, I
But
that is probably most likely is that we just kind of
because I
I
also get the
misunderstood.
sense that Liz isn't going to spy on people.
Mhm,
But I think
exactly.
what she means is like, let's pull cards of that person in relation to you,
Yeah,
like, yeah, anyway. And then there was, more stuff about like getting very specific again about the kind of questions that you're asking. Like, for example, I was thinking back to a question that we got on one of our Instagram lives, and a person was just asking, where are my partner and I at right now? And,
mhm,
we're on a live, we're just kind of pulling cards. We're not going super, super deep, but we could have further specified that to be like, where do you want to be? Like, what are
yeah,
you guys aiming for? And then pull cards around how to like welcome in that energy. Because I think,
yeah,
without us knowing, that person, it turned out that, they're very happy together right now. They're struggling with a certain thing, but in their relationship, they're quite happy. But maybe that person wanted to see that there was an end coming soon, and we wouldn't have known
yeah,
that.
right, yeah, and I think that kind of but then on the other hand, that is more of a public platform, so if you to get those kind of
Yes,
really deep readings, I would, like, in that situation, I would recommend getting a one-on-one
for
private,
sure, for sure. Yeah,
but no, absolutely, like, if that were a one-on-one reading, that could have gone so much deeper, so much deeper, especially because the person was willing to share and communicate and, like, give you that feedback as we were reading cards, which was really helpful.
totally. Yeah. But in general, I know you're not a fan, and neither am I, quite honestly, of love readings.
No.
What's your kind of status on that?
Well, okay. So I don't know if all the listeners are aware of this, but I worked for a company and did like the text in readings where you could text and then get your readings back or email or whatever, right?
Oh
And so
yeah.
we did like high volume readings. So it would be like a quick answer, you got to answer back. And I would say like 95% of the people that were texting in, they wanted to know, when am I going to meet my person of my dreams? Oh, is this person right for me? Or I met this person. Are they the one? And it's like there was so much codependency and this obsession with just being not alone. And what they would do is if they didn't get the answer they wanted from one reader, they would send it to a different reader, the exact same
Oh
question.
my god.
So it was an obsessive codependent thing. And that was pretty much when I was like, okay, I will not do these kinds of readings because I'm not gonna empower that self-destructive behavior. Like you need to focus on you, not on, Mr. Right or whatever.
Yeah.
So yeah.
Yeah, I guess for me, I'm just like, we can talk about that, but I'd rather talk about like you in general, I guess. So again,
Yeah.
I think I'm coming back to that more middle ground now where it's like, all right, I guess we can pull cards about the relationship, but I want it to be how the relationship is affecting you or what you're
Yeah.
doing in the relationship. Like, I really always try to circle back to like the
Yeah.
person.
Yeah, and for sure, if there's like an established relationship, like, "Hey, I'm married and I wanna know something," I'll pull cards for that because that's
Gotcha.
that's
Yeah.
different to me than that
Yeah,
love
totally.
doctor.
Yeah. All right, well, let's talk about tarot and life. Now, this was one of my favorite parts. Just talking about the ways in which one small thing can create an entire thread of our lives, and that every step we take is part of this larger sequence of steps, a sort of like a larger path. And I think this is my new, and what's funny is that I should listen back to our old episodes because I wonder if I had a similar answer just worded differently. But this is my new what magic means to me, of just this idea that, like, even what I'm doing right now is part of a larger sequence of things for this week, is part of a larger sequence of things for the month in general. And
Mhm.
I love looking at life in this way. That book that I mentioned earlier, where I wasn't going to write the introduction, it was actually essentially about looking at that approach to life and being like, hey, this one thing that I did that day actually led to this, which led to that, which led to that. And not like ever negating something because you just never know. Like
Yeah.
I was listening to a podcast that put out a call for, hey, do you want to write about TV? Send me an email. I sent an email. I started writing for a website about TV. I started getting really into TV and then I started a podcast. I was really in TV and had a podcast. And so I watched Twin Peaks. Was really into Twin Peaks and there was a Twin Peaks tarot deck and I found the Twin Peaks tarot deck and then I got really into tarot and then I got really into tarot and then I found astrology. And it's like, if I had never sent that email, I might never have found astrology. And
Wow.
it just gives me chills to think about stuff like that. How just reaching
Wow.
out and going for something and doing it and like doing that minor arcana everyday thing can completely change the trajectory of
Yeah.
your life.
Okay, but then we can take it back even farther to something that's even more mundane. If you hadn't had a background in like knowing everything about all these different TV shows and being able to write with it with some authority, like, so literally watching TV was a
Right.
big deal.
Yes, and, like, that was part of the thing of my
Whoa.
book was, like, TV has
Whoa.
changed my life, and people, like, poo-poo TV all the time, but it changed my life.
Whoa.
Yeah, it's so cool to think about, and
Oh,
I loved thinking about tarot in this way because it's one of the reasons that I love tarot so much too, you know? So
oh. Yeah, I don't even know how to follow up with that now. I just don't even know where to go from there.
Well, I think you have some quotes here, which I think are really great.
Oh, okay. Well, yeah, there's so one of the quotes that I wrote down, it really kind of was fun to think about. The quote is, I don't see a difference between the big and the small, the magic and the ordinary. To me, everything can be seen as a spiritual act. If we can find meaning, gratitude, intention, or purpose in what we do each day, we don't need to constantly seek spiritual fireworks. And that,
Yes.
if anything describes mundane magic, there it
Yes.
is.
Yes, and
There it is.
that's, like, what I'm really vibing on
Yeah.
right now too.
Yes. And I mean, it goes hand in hand with what you were just talking about. And I think that's why I have all the goosebumps. It's because it's just like
Same, yeah.
everything I believe in my core is just like, boom, right there in print.
And, like, for patrons, on the Taurus bonus, I believe I was talking about the 3rd and the ninth house, or maybe just the 3rd
Yeah.
house with you, but, like,
Yeah.
I'm seeing this everywhere now, like, this is 3rd house.
Yeah.
All these small little magics that build up to the big magic that happens in the ninth house. Like, the ninth house is when you have, like, a spiritual vision or something, but the
Yeah.
3rd house is the things you do every day that led up to that.
Oh,
It's the best.
that's so juicy. Okay. I'm here for it. I'm just here for it.
Yeah, all of it.
Okay. So one more quote. It was, if we can maintain self awareness and look at our lives as a series of chapters, then we can find the lessons, growth, and focus we need along the way. And so I just really love this whole idea of seeing ourselves as a character in a book, like the main character in our own life story, though,
Mhm.
not just somebody's sidekick.
Mhm.
So, and I think if we lived our lives that way, we would feel so much more validation and personal authority over what we do and the choices we make. I love the
Yes.
concept of that.
Yeah. And then you can even take that further, like understanding that when you are in relationship, you might be a lesser character in that person's book.
Yes. Yes.
But that doesn't make you a lesser person, but
No.
it's just like understanding those different perspectives, I guess.
Yeah. You can't be the main character in everyone's story.
Yeah.
I love that. I could just chew on that for weeks.
Yeah. This definitely was the most, I think maybe just because of where we're at in our tarot reading
Yeah.
practice, this was the juiciest part of the book for sure.
Hmm. I agree.
All right. Well, you want to talk about the section on tarot and work?
Sure. There was one specific quote that kind of just really got me. It was, success can mean different things to different people. And I think
Mhm.
this is really important, especially if you're going to read for other people. What you see as success, maybe that's, a bigger paycheck and a bigger house, isn't necessarily success for someone else. Someone else's success could just look at like being able to stay at home and only work 1 day a week and
Yep.
have a small farm.
Yep.
Because, hi,
I was like,
here I am.
who is
Yeah.
this?
So, and I think it's just because so many of us are just consumed with that whole like, we've got to have bigger and better and more expensive and it's got to be brand name and we've got to make sure we look good, compared to so and so that lives next door. I think we forget that everybody's kind of fighting for this false illusion of what success is. And we just need to empower ourselves to to create that vision of our own and not let other people or other influences kind of play any factor into that.
Yeah. And I mean, that somewhat involves dismantling capitalism, at least within ourselves, which is
The
tough work.
patriarchy.
So, and the patriarchy, yes, of course, which is tough work. So give yourself a
It is.
break,
Yes.
but
Yes, please do. But yeah, that was the major thing for the work section that really stood out.
well, then let's talk about, I believe this is the final, well, there is the very short couple of pages at the end that called The Truth About Reading Tarot, which is basically a reiteration of like, you're the one reading it. Like you got to look
Yeah.
within yourself to figure everything out, right? But
Yeah.
the most important skill in reading tarot, which I believe was discernment, is what she said.
Yeah. It was discernment. So that's definitely my favorite interpretation of the judgment card, which is
That's
why I said that.
exactly what I thought about. Yeah.
Yeah. Um,
Um, and I think this is an important skill in all of life. And I think it's something, I mean, discernment is also critical thinking,
yeah.
is also judgment in that more sort of positive light, like without all
Yeah.
those negative connotations we've thrown at that word. But it's a good thing to have just in general, I think, is to be discerning and, not be overly trusting, not be overly turned off, which again, I know is very difficult. But
Yeah.
my only note from here is just that I really feel bad or I really have a soft spot for people that for whatever reason just weren't given the skills for discernment and weren't given maybe an opportunity to develop discernment. I'm not sure, but
Yeah.
Liz speaks about having this client that was seeing another tarot reader who was telling him for years that he had a curse on him and that she was going to this place where all tarot readers go and lighting a candle for him to get rid of the curse. And I had to put the book down because I was just
I
so
was
I
I
was
was upset for
so
this person.
so frustrated for this person, so just like bummed out that that would be the
Yeah.
image that he got about tarot readers, or just that he had to carry that weight for so long in
Yeah.
his life. I mean,
Not to
that's just
mention the money.
horrible. Oh my god, the
Like,
money. Yeah.
oh,
But I've also heard stories about like, I took this tarot course a couple of years ago, and one of the people that I was in the course with wrote in for one of the like question and answer segments and was saying, is it true that maybe you're just not meant to have tarot cards read for you? I once had somebody tell me that like my energy was just too wrong to have my cards read for. And I just like wept as I listened to it because it was just so awful. Like,
oh my
where do you
God.
get off telling somebody that? And where do you
How,
get off
oh,
using tarot as a shield within which to
as a
like,
scam artist tool.
ugh,
Like,
it's
oh,
disgusting.
so I mean, here's the thing. This is where I mean, normally I'm like this peace loving person. I try not to really get too into things because I don't want to create that energy, right?
Yeah.
But to anyone who ever uses tarot as a tool to manipulate or to cheat somebody or just to even hold power over somebody, go fuck yourself.
Yeah,
I'm just gonna get
100%.
that right
I
out
will double
there.
that.
I just can't. I can't.
It's just really gross. There's no place for it, and it's just I just feel so deeply for those people that have been told things like that and have had to
Yeah.
carry that.
Yeah.
It's not true. Ugh.
Oh, yeah. And listeners, if any of you have ever been told by a tarot reader that you have some curse on you or your family and they need to break it, or you need to come back every 6 weeks for it up, no, you get to pick and choose, first of all, how often you come back for a reading. You get to pick who does your cards. So if somebody makes you uncomfortable or tries to scare you, get a second opinion. This is no different than, going to see another doctor. So
Mhm.
please just be aware and use that discernment because oh, first of all, you can have card readings. There's not a person on the planet who is not able to have a card reading.
Yes.
Maybe you need a different reader.
Yes.
Absolutely.
You absolutely need a different reader.
Yeah. If somebody tells you that,
yeah,
you definitely need a different reader. But yeah, just don't let yourself be afraid. It's not right.
Well, I think if you're good to round things out with your final point here about the truth about tarot readings, I think that would be a great thing to leave our listeners on.
Absolutely. Okay, well, the quote that this came from was, you can memorize card reading or card meanings all day long, but when it comes time to string them all together into a coherent, meaningful statement, you must begin to rely on your instinct and your own vocabulary.
Mm-hmm.
Now, this is so real. This is such a good, huge, great piece of advice. Every literate person could pick up a book about tarot meetings and just read the interpretations word for word. I mean, if you're just starting out, of course, that's a great way to get started and kind of feel out the cards and get an idea of how they work. But in order to progress and really deepen your practice, you need to figure out what they say to you and through you to other people. No one is going to do that work for you. Nobody can do that work for you.
Yeah.
So you need to do that learning. It takes trust in yourself, and it takes lots of really good old-fashioned practice. This can be a really big turnoff. I know for some people, we've been groomed our whole lives because we live in a time where instant gratification is just the norm. It's what we just expect. I promise you, it is really worth the effort. Just put in the work and enjoy the ride. It's not an end goal. It's an ongoing journey.
Yeah. You'll never be at the end of that journey. And I mean, even if you do, I know I myself found it frustrating at the beginning when I just wasn't quote unquote getting it. But all those years ago, it feels already so long ago. It just went like that. You know what I mean? It's fine. You'll get there.
The time's going to pass anyway. So just enjoy the ride.
Yeah. I think, what did I say the other day? It's you only have that, experience of doing something new once. So just enjoy that newness, enjoy that freshness, enjoy that everything is for the first time,
Yeah. It's just that sense of wonder. Just take it in every chance you get.
Yeah. All right. Well, that is definitely going to wrap it up for us on this episode. This was fun. I definitely think we should do another book club, but actually make it like a book club. We'll do it right this time or the next time.
Yeah. Thank you for joining us for this extra long chat.
Yeah, I mean, a little behind the scenes, we had a fair amount of technical issues. I have no idea how long this will be. I hope you enjoy it all.
Yes. And we love you.
Yes, much love. Thank you so much for listening to this episode of the Tarot Coven Cast. Stay tuned for our next episode, where we'll be interviewing a very special guest. And until then, everyone, keep making magic.